Do you think part of the problem is that he was a law professor? And I say this as a former lawyer. I think that many lawyers, and particularly, yes, a recovering lawyer, but particularly law professors, really do want to explain. They want to be able to delineate a whole variety of points. And sometimes it's very difficult to whittle that down into one concise soundbite. On the one hand this, on the one hand this, and then he puts the facts out there and people make their decision.
Big problem. I have a chapter on The Promise called Professor in Chief, and it's something that he has struggled with. On the one hand, we want an intelligent president, and he's very intelligent. On the other hand, you need to cut through a lot of the verbiage to the nub of what busy people need in their busy lives to understand what's going on in the government.
Now, I want to switch gears for a minute and talk about what's happening in the Middle East, because it's obviously widely accepted that Obama's election was a turning point, not just in the United States, but all around the world. Do you think that it would be a stretch to imagine that the revolutions in the Arab world perhaps might not have happened but for President Obama's election, and but for the fact that this whole idea of him being an agent of change was so widely covered all around the world?
I think it clearly was a factor. To say that it wouldn't have happened without Obama might be a stretch, but the speech he gave in Cairo in 2009, which was one of the most important of his presidency, one of the most important speeches given anywhere in the world in the last 5 to 10 years, was, as he explained it to me when I interviewed him, directed at what they call the Arab street, directed at young people to say, you know, not to tell them to go out in the streets and overthrow their rulers, but to raise the flag for democracy and to tell this new young generation that he was behind their aspirations. It was interesting that Hosni Mubarak didn't go to that speech in Cairo, and there was already a little bit of tension between these, at that time, totally disorganized forces of change and the old regimes. And there's also been a lot of kind of one step forward, two steps back, because there are security considerations and a lot of people in the U.S. government and internationally who have not wanted the United States to get too far out front on what's come to be known as the Arab Spring. So it's been a real balancing act for the president. And in some cases, balancing act for his Secretary of State, too. I have an article coming out in Vanity Fair next month on Hillary Clinton. And there were times when she was ahead of the curve and at times where she and the president were behind the curve on all this change. But I think you're right that historians looking back will see that a dramatically different president of the United States who looked different, sounded different than his predecessors was in some, at least indirect way, connected to these forces of change that are sweeping the world.
Now, where were the key areas that they were behind the curve?
Well, just to give you, a couple of quick examples, Hillary Clinton said that Hosni Mubarak was stable just 17 days before he fell. Joe Biden said, and later regretted, that Hosni Mubarak was not a dictator. Now, you have to understand that they were getting a lot of pressure from Israel and Saudi Arabia and other allies in the region to not press too hard for change that could lead to, the Muslim Brotherhood. We don't yet know where all of this is going. So change is tough, and you have to calibrate your response.
I want to circle back to the 2012 presidential election because it appears that the Republican field is rather weak, and that is perhaps why someone like Donald Trump seems to be generating some interest among the Tea Party. I want to get your take on the field. Who do you think is the stronger candidate? Who do you think is going to ultimately run? And it really appears as if the Republican Party is always searching for the next Ronald Reagan Republican. Who do you think that person might be?
You know, I don't know, and I'm much more comfortable looking back than looking forward. But I think there are some names that haven't gotten very much attention that might be factors. Gary Johnson, the former governor of New Mexico, was a libertarian candidate, very appealing, is apparently going to run, and I think he'll get some support as this goes on. And John Huntsman, if he decides to run, the former governor of Utah, who's just leaving as U.S. ambassador to China, very attractive candidate. And you know, the problem that Mitt Romney has is that, as Mike Huckabee says, he reminds you a little too much of the guy who laid you off, you know. And he also, because the Romney care in Massachusetts so resembles Obamacare, he's going to have some problems in the Republican primaries, but he still has to be considered the favorite. And I'd also look at Tim Pawlenty as a possibility.
Now, I want to get to your latest book, The Promise, President Obama, Year One. It's recently out in paperback. It went to #4 on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list. You're working on a sequel now, I understand. So how similar or different will the sequel be, and why?
Well, the Promise covered 2009, and then in the paperback 2010. So the sequel will cover 2011, 2012, and so the story hasn't happened yet. It's a little hard for me to know what's going to be in the book, but what I was able to do in The Promise, and we'll be able to do in this book, is take you behind the closed doors of the Oval Office or the Situation Room, or in this case, the campaign offices. This book will have a lot more about the campaign. The last book did not cover the 2008 campaign. And so usually books of this kind are either campaign books or government books. This is going to be both. It's going to have a lot more about Republicans than my last book, and I've already spent time with folks in the Tea Party. And the fascinating thing about this, and the reason I'm really excited about this sequel, is that the 2012 election is really about something. It's not a small stakes election. If the Republicans take the White House, they will have control over all three branches of government, because they'll definitely get control of the Senate if they get the White House. So they'll have the Congress, the White House, and they do have the Supreme Court at this point, as we've learned from some cases. We don't know where they would then take the country, but we have some hints from things like the Ryan bill that just passed the House of Representatives, which privatizes Medicare, makes big changes. It's not like the 1996 Clinton re-election when it was about school uniforms and little things. This is about the American social contract. What do we owe each other as a people? Do we want to go back to essentially a pre-New Deal America, where we don't have the same sense of what the role of government is in our lives? You could describe what some Republicans are saying as radical. So the question is, do we want to make a radical move or stay more in the kind of pragmatic, slightly left of center posture that Barack Obama represents? So big stakes.
Very, very high stakes. So we have time for one last question. You've recently left Newsweek after 28 years with the magazine, and now you're going to Bloomberg News and Bloomberg View.
Bloomberg View.
So I want to talk a little bit about that. Why make that change at this point, and what are the reasons that contributed to that decision for you?
First of all, I'm leaving on very good terms, and I think Tina Brown and the late Sidney Harmon rescued Newsweek, which I was very interested in. I didn't want to see it go out of business, and I'll probably write freelance for Newsweek and the Daily Beast in the years ahead. But it was just time for me personally to do something new. Bloomberg View, which is a new commentary site that's being launched next month and is run by David Shipley, who was the op-ed editor of the New York Times, and Jamie Rubin, who was Assistant Secretary of State. It just seemed really exciting to me to try to create a new place for commentary and analysis, and so I'm going to write a weekly column for them, and I'm pumped about it.
Now, how much of Bloomberg View is going to express the mayor's personal views?
They will have editorials every day that will reflect his views, although he's not going to, spend a lot of his time, as I understand it, telling them what to write. So those editorials will reflect his views, but the columnists, and I'm only one of several, will be free to express our own views.
Even if it's contrary to his opinion.
That's what I understand, yeah.
Okay, well, Jonathan Alter, thanks so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks, Julie.